Hey, saints and sinners. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Luke Up. I'm very excited about what we have to talk about this week, despite some things that have happened in my life, personally and professionally, the past week. So I would ask for your prayers and working through some of that stuff. But God is good, and we know that He works all things together for good to those who love Him, to those who are called according to His purpose. And that's why I will not be dissuaded, and I will continue to be here week after week proclaiming His word because uh, I need to hear it. We all need to hear it, and we need encouragement when times are difficult, as Jesus promised us that they would be. So this week, we have an interesting topic to cover, and I must be stupid or something after taking some slings and arrows over my last episode, which really took us out of the world of theology and uh, sort of transcendent things and just philosophical concerns that probably weren't all that offensive to anyone. Just didn't really concern people that weren't believers. Last week, I of course set my sights on the golden calf of atheism, which I believe is the hypothesis of evolution. I refuse to call it a theory. Um, and so, after taking some slings and arrows on that topic, we are here again to attack one of Satan's favorite tools. Uh, and this is going to require some nuance. So please stick with me because it's we're going to be coming hard at uh, some worldly things, but we're going to try to get practical in this episode and um, look at as Christians how we should approach uh, kind of a topic that people are a little squeamish about. And with no further ado, we will begin this week's episode, which I have titled "The Church and the State." All right, welcome back. I am Luke. This is Luke Up, and we're talking about the church and the state this week. And I feel I should mention before we get too far that these are two terms that are distinct but not mutually exclusive. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we go through the episode. Um, I contended several weeks ago that basically the notion of separation of church and state is kind of fake, not meaning that the civil government and Christ's church are one and the same. More that both are created by God, and as Christians, we have a rightful place in both of them. So we're going to be looking at our old pal Martin Luther for some guidance on this topic, and then we are going to talk in some very practical matters as far as what good government looks like and what bad government looks like. Yes, there is such a thing as good government. I know many Christians of a certain political persuasion, like myself, tend to not think that that is possible. But as we will see in our Bible verse of the day, which I cheated on, it's actually like 6, 7 verses. So bear with me. I'll try to put as much of it on the screen as possible. My editing skills are a little choppy, so we'll do the best that we can do. Also, point of housekeeping. I did not snort a bunch of cocaine before recording this. Uh, the the store that I usually stop at and get my decaf lattes on the way home from work was unable to make decaf today, so I'm just full test, full bore ahead. And I'm excited. So I hope you are too. And let's talk about some controversial stuff. First, we need to read our Bible verse of the day because we need to make sure that we are grounded and uh, we're not in purely attack mode. We are still in serving God mode and in drawing nearer to Him mode. But we have to understand that how we live in the world and how we interact with people around us, which is just what government is, what politics is, it's just how we get along. The way in which we participate in that system kind of has a big impact on what barriers there are to us drawing nearer to God and how many things there are pushing us away from Him. And so that should be the Christian's calculus in politics. So let's go ahead and read our Bible verses of the day. Day, week, verse, verses. It's fluid. I'm sure that if you have watched any number of these episodes, you have picked up on that about me. I like to have a loose outline, but I don't like for my hands to be tied. So I just want to go wherever God leads us on this one. I've got several pages of notes, and I anticipate using only about half of them. So we'll see. We'll just see where it goes. So our Bible verses of the day will come from the epistle of 1 Peter. A coworker and I have a weekly Bible study. There used to be several of us in there, and it's kind of dwindled down, but the Lord promises us that wherever two or more are gathered in His name, He's there among us. So I'm very thankful to Him for that Bible study that just, before work, midweek, gets us recharged and helps us keep our eyes focused on God and, not get bogged down in some of the kind of sticky type situations I was dealing with last week and are still holding over to now. So, um, I'm thankful for that. But we've been studying in First Peter, and I don't know, this chapter was very helpful to me in some of these situations that I've been dealing with, and I think it's very instructive to us as Christians that still have to live in the world. So we're going to read this, and we're going to get some commentary from Martin Luther. I'm going to kind of summarize it. I don't want to read him verbatim, just some things that I've read that he's written on this. So let us begin with 1 Peter chapter 2, and we are going to be reading verses 13 through 20. Someone told me recently that their pastor repeats, when telling people, here's where we're going to be reading from, repeats it several times. Now, as Lutheran, we have it in our bulletin what the scripture reading is for the week. So no need to find it in your Bible. It's there for you. But in case you are like me, lifelong Baptist, recent convert to Lutheranism, Christian the whole time. So let's just have that said. That hasn't changed. But I like to have my physical Bible. So if you are like me, I will repeat it and give you a moment. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13, verses 13 through 20. 1 Peter chapter 2. It says, "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free men, and do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondslaves of God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are unreasonable. For this finds favor, if for the sake of conscience toward God a person bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. I'm going to be honest. That is a hard one. That is very, very hard. Let me just read that final verse again. For what credit is there if when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. All right. So I'll just give a little anecdote here about a situation that this has really helped me with this past week. So I think I've described what I do for a living on this program, but in case it's not abundantly clear, I work for the government. I'm a public employee. Um, Not anything big time. I'm a local government employee, so I make a good salary. Um, don't really have all that much power. Uh, I mean, the authority that I have is delegated to me by the state to enforce state rules regarding septic system design and inspection. But I'm not free to just make whatever decisions I like. I have to actually implement the state rules. And so if someone questions me on my implementation, I have to be able to support, by statute and by rule what I'm doing. So naturally, being a regulatory authority brings you into conflict with people at times. And uh, I have always struggled with a bit of a temper. And you may not be able to tell that about me from my demeanor in this podcast, which is fairly mellow. And most of the time, that's how I am. Um, but when provoked to what I have always thought of as a kind of a righteous indignation, um, I really dig in my heels oftentimes. And that's where it gets off track. So this past week, I had a situation where I was inspecting a septic system, and it's not a pass fail kind of thing. It's there are certain margins of tolerance, and um, there's a lot that goes into it. People don't realize that from a design standpoint and from an inspection standpoint. It's a fairly challenging job, um, and our department has kind of a reputation, which I'm sure that I have contributed greatly to, of being fairly strict. And it's for good reason. We want our septic systems to function properly. We want to protect groundwater. We want to protect drinking water. We want to protect children and pets, and we don't want sewage leaking out on top of the ground or going into our streams. So there are things that we have to do in our soil evaluation and system design and inspection procedures to make sure that works. So this past week, I had an inspection, which have several of them a day. It's not a See, some of them go well, some of them go decently with some things to fix, and some of them go really badly. So this was with an installer who normally does excellent work, and I've had a good working relationship with for the past 7 or 8 years. And I happen to know that he is a Christian. And just through, I guess, certain assumptions and miscommunications that happened, um, my my integrity was called into question, and that tends to be pretty offensive to me because I try to treat everyone the same way, and not meanly. I try to help people make things compliant. If that means hopping in a ditch and digging a little bit more to get it closer to level so they can finish up and go home, I'm more than willing to do that. And so, but it took a turn for the personal. And, I was treated to a whole tirade about how uh, none of the septic installers like me, and they all complain about me at their class meetings for their continuing education, and things of that nature. And so it really bothered me. Now, by God's grace and only through the wisdom of His Holy Spirit, I was able to help sort of de-escalate the situation. We got it resolved. We got to an understanding. Um, I think I eventually made it clear to him that the problems that I was looking at were nothing out of the ordinary, and I was not um, assailing his honesty or capabilities. Really, I just had a process to go through because something kind of went wrong on the installation, and I just had a process to go through to find a solution for it. And so we kind of de-escalated, and I got down on the core level of speaking as a Christian brother to a Christian brother, and we reached an understanding, and left on good terms, and so praise God for that. But I realized that being a Christian in a position such as mine, uh, it's sort of causes a cognitive dissonance for people, because we often think as Christians very linearly that you have Christ's kingdom and you have uh, you know Caesar's kingdom or Babylon or Egypt or whatever you want to call it. You have Christ's kingdom and you have the world. And broadly, that's true. But as Christians, we still have to live in the world. We should not be of the world, but we still have to participate in it. And so I want to go to our friend Martin Luther for some guidance on how Christians are supposed to understand government, how Christians are supposed to interact with government. And this is going to be probably a little controversial, but I'm also going to talk about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and how he got this question terribly wrong. And I think he knew that later in his life and ultimately changed his views. I just recently finished reading The Cost of Discipleship by Bonhoeffer, which is a tremendous, tremendous book. That it's kind of a tough read. He's an excellent writer, but it's a little difficult to follow. But it's very, very good. I just disagree with his conclusion on Christians as it pertains to the state. So let's look at our old pal Martin Luther for some guidance. Now, Martin Luther wrote on what he called the three estates, and these he identified as the church, the family, and the state. And I said them in that order for a specific reason. So these estates are sort of domains that we as humans participate in, and they are distinct, but they necessarily overlap because we are not like the people on the TV show Severance, where you have your work you, and that person doesn't know what goes on at home. They just like they leave the building. Next thing they know, they're back and they're just there at work all the time. And the people that are outside are at home all the time. And so when they enter the building, it just jumps ahead as far as their perception, and then they're leaving, and they don't have a clue what's going on at work. Well, our lives ought not to be like that as Christians. We're supposed to be Christians wherever we go, whether we are in the workplace or in our home or in our church. Everywhere we go, we are supposed to represent Christ. So, Martin Luther's idea of the three estates as the church, the family, and the state. This is an idea that he developed to kind of explain these things that we understand somewhat, but we don't know how they're supposed to interact with each other. So, as Martin Luther described it, the church is kind of the eternal estate from which all else springs forth. And so when God created Adam, this was the institution of his church on earth. In other words, the church is the relationship between God and man. And so in the time of the patriarchs, that was just through, God's direct communication with certain people. In the primacy of Israel, in their heyday, it was through the Mosaic and Levitical law that God had imparted to them, and that required animal sacrifice for payment of sins. And in our day, we have seen the completion of the church through Jesus Christ, and we talked week before last, about how the church has fulfilled through Jesus Christ the promises that God made to Abraham. And so the church is the fulfillment of Israel. This is sort of a controversial topic nowadays, but it really shouldn't be. This is kind of the historical position of the church. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about this week. If you want to see my full take on that, I would encourage you to go watch episode 8, Israel and the Church. So the church is God's relationship to man. Okay, well, of course, we know from Genesis 2 that God observed that it was not good for Adam to be alone. He needed community with other people, and other people that he had a stake in, which is why God made Eve from Adam's rib. So he literally had skin in the game, and he created the family, and he commanded them to be fruitful and multiply. And this is before the fall, lest we get confused and think that sex was the original sin. God told them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. So that was a good thing that God made, was the family. He made us to worship him, and he made more of us to share together in building lives that are oriented toward him. Okay, then we have a problem. We learn in Genesis 3 that Adam goofed it all up and disobeyed God, and gave in to the mistake that Eve made, and just made it way worse by willfully disobeying God. And we introduced sin into the world. So for more on that, you can listen to episode 3, The Problem of Sin, or just crack open your Bible and read Genesis 3, and then skip ahead to Romans and read pretty much the whole thing. That would be a good sequence of events. So to deal with the problem of sin, God had his final solution, which he was planning from the start. God's never surprised. So Christ was not his plan B, with Israel being his plan A. That doesn't work. He was always planning to send Jesus. So the problem in the interim is we still have to deal with each other in this fallen state that exists because of Adam. We still have to figure out how we're going to get along, what rules we're going to live by, and how we're going to punish wrongdoing, and how we're going to reward positive things so that we have a society that does good and avoids evil and orients itself toward God. And for this purpose, he created the state, which is the third estate as envisioned by Martin Luther. Now we read in 1 Peter chapter 2, where he says, "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. So we have it there straight from the apostle that government was invented by God. Of course, human free will was invented by God, and look what we did with it. So that's not to say that we're capable of screwing up anything that God gives us. Anything good, we can just choke and strangle and ruin with our sinful nature. We can do it to our marriages. We can do it to our friendships. We can do it to our jobs that provide for our families. We can do it with our churches even. We can ruin anything. So of course we can ruin our government. But God invented government. It's supposed to be a good thing. It has a good function if it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. Now, what if it's not doing what it's supposed to do? Okay. This is where we have some disagreement among Christians broadly. And I think it comes down to how you read 1 Peter. So, looking down at some of the latter verses that we read, where it says, servants, be submissive to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are unreasonable. This is an unpopular message in our very liberal and individualistic world, that each of us has kind of a station in life that God has ordained for us. Not everyone is meant to be an NBA player. If that were the case, I would be better at shooting threes. God did not see fit to grant me that ability. He also made me asthmatic, so that would be kind of a problem in the NBA. That's okay, because God still made me fairly able-bodied, and he gave me an active mind and kind of an analytical mind, and that makes me suited to certain things, like the job that I have, and hopefully like this podcast. I hope that I am serving and honoring him and the gifts that he's given me by doing this. And so each of us has a station in life. And this will relate to kind of our second topic. You know what? I forgot to mention my outline. Well, it's too late now. It'll just have to be a surprise what's coming up in the second part of the episode. So stay tuned. Keep listening. So, like I said, this is where we have some difficulty. Now, I think we should also listen to the words of Christ on this, who said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Now, this was in response to a question that was asked of him. Master, who do should we pay taxes to Caesar? He's not God. Why do we owe him anything? And he said that he said, look at this coin here. Whose image is on it? And there was Caesar's image, because they were under the Roman Empire's rule, and they used Roman currency. And of course, Caesar is on the money. Just like we have our presidents on our money. And he said, well, there you go. The money is Caesar's. Give it to him. If he taxes you, you pay it. He didn't say if he taxes you what you think is a fair amount to tax you. He said, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. And I think people will respond to that initially with the right heart posture, in the right spirit, but they sort of take it to an extreme that leads to this very kind of limp-wristed Christianity that says that we can never speak out against evil. In other words, Christians who are either afraid or unwilling for some other reason. I don't want to speculate about individual people's motives, but we'll say generally afraid to say that abortion is murder, and that the government uh, has no authority to make that legal. This brings up a larger debate between the moral law and the civil law, and I may have to dig into that a little more because I don't know that I feel qualified to speak on that in any kind of great detail. But the point is, Caesar is allowed to charge you taxes. He is not allowed to kill your children. So the government has legitimate functions. Even if it mishandles them, there are arenas that it is ordained to operate within. So, for instance, my job. My job exists to protect the public health of the citizens of the county that I work in. Now, whether or not you think it's reasonable to, have to have someone evaluate the soils on your property and tell you what type of drain field product you can install and where it has to go, and come back and check to make sure it was installed correctly. Whether or not you think that the government ought to have that right, um, you should understand that that in no way conflicts with God's domain. Peter says, "Act as free men and do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bond slaves of God." In other words, we live in a free society. People will complain, "Oh, no, it's not free because you have the government making you do this." But the United States of America is the freest country that has ever been created on planet Earth, bar none. Bar none. But it's not because we have the freedom to go work at the widget factory and make widgets for Mr. McGillicuddy. It's because we have the freedom to worship our God. And I probably could go down a whole separate rabbit hole about the freedom of religion and why that's important. Not because all religions are valid, but because God wants us to freely respond to his pull on us. He didn't want to program us, but he wants to pull us toward him, and we have to respond to that. And we have to live in such a way that shows that we are responding to that. But I guess the point of all this is that if government has a legitimate function, which at its core is aimed at punishing evil and rewarding good, or you could describe it as um, providing good for people and stopping evil toward people. You may disagree about how it is going about that. You may think, oh, why do you need an inspection for a septic system? You just got to use a little common sense. Well, I mean, my perspective on that is common sense doesn't tell you how to identify soil wetness conditions using chroma 2 colors. It doesn't tell you how to use slope correction to tell you how deep a trench is going to go and make sure that there's adequate soil depth under it for treatment before it hits groundwater or shoots off into weathered rock. Common sense is inadequate to the task. So we may have differences on, how we think those sort of things should be prioritized. But the thing we should all agree on is that it's good for the government to protect people, and it's good for the government to punish evil. So I think it's evil to pollute someone's drinking water. Therefore, I think that the government has a legitimate function. Not the federal government, because that's not in the Constitution, but those powers are reserved for state and local governments. And so if you don't like the rules in North Carolina, you can vote to have them changed, or you can go to another state that, doesn't have those sort of rules. But here's the real point to all of this, and this is where I think that Dietrich Bonhoeffer got this wrong in The Cost of Discipleship. Which, in his defense, he was about my age when he wrote it. This was, I think, like 7 or 8 years before he became a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany and participated in the plot to assassinate Hitler, which obviously failed. But his convictions were a little different once he saw true tyranny. And this brings me to the crux of my point, and it will lead nicely into what I'm going to talk about in the latter part of the episode. So, Bonhoeffer, in The Cost of Discipleship, had this sort of notion that as Christians, well, we ought not to concern ourselves with matters of government. Yes, be subject to the government, and as best you can live in accord with it, as you are being first and foremost obedient to Christ. But basically, that Christians shouldn't participate in government because those are positions of power, and we are supposed to be meek, and we are supposed to submit, and so we should not be ruling over anyone. We should just be locked in on humbling ourselves. Okay, well, here's the problem with that. It's like, it's like gun control. Sounds great on paper. We'll take guns away from people so they can't hurt each other. Well, the problem is when you outlaw guns, only the outlaws have guns. So people who have no regard for the law are going to continue to have no regard for the law. But then the people who do have regard for the law and only want to be able to protect themselves and their family are no longer going to be able to do so. And I don't care what you say, if someone breaks into my house at 2 in the morning, the local police department is 20 minutes away from my house. So they ain't getting here in time to protect me and my family. But the Beretta 9mm that I have in my closet will sure as heck protect my wife and son. That's a whole other tangent. I didn't really want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But the point is, you outlaw guns, only the outlaws have guns. Okay. You remove Christians from government, then only non-Christians are governing. And is that really what we want? Do we want, and this is where the sort of limp-wristed Christianity that I'm talking about comes into play. Because people will say, oh, well, these are my beliefs, but I don't want to impose them on anyone else. It's just my belief that it's wrong to murder children in the womb. But that's just my belief. And other people don't believe that, and that's fine. They can do whatever. That is so, so wrong, and it is so, so dangerous, and it is so cowardly to hold that position. And I'm sorry if you're one of those people, but you need to step it up and unapologetically speak out against evil and actually do something about it. God created government for the punishment of evildoers. Who do you think is going to run the government? Evildoers? Do you think that if you put non-Christians into positions of power, that they're going to magically arrive at moral decisions on their own? Now, that's what Sam Harris thinks. People who think that we can arrive at some kind of morality just based on evolution and just this human intuition about preventing harm or that sort of nonsense. Well, how do you know what's good? If there is no central guiding principle, aka God, who is good, who is the source of what good even means, if there's no universal good, then good is just a matter of preference. And so, yeah, I prefer not to kill babies, but you prefer to kill babies, so fine. It's your preference. So whoever, like, whatever you want to do, whatever, man, like, don't yuck my yum. And, you know, that's malarkey. It is an indefensible position as a Christian to say that, well, we can't possibly wield power because power is wrong. And yes, power does corrupt. Absolutely. We've seen many high profile cases, and I have seen cases just in local government. Power corrupts. Yes, it does. But the institution itself was ordained by God. I've seen people in positions of power in the church use that power for evil ends. Does that mean that church is bad and Christians shouldn't participate in it? No. No, of course not. God made it. It's a good thing. Government is a good thing. Otherwise, we'd all be monkeys climbing around in trees, throwing our own feces at each other, gunning each other down in the streets. It would be anarchy. So there has to be government. But what is government supposed to do? Well, as Christians, we want government to do good. We want it to punish evil and reward good. That's what it's for. And the only way you're going to get that is by Christians serving in government. And so, no, I will not be swayed from continuing to serve the public as I see fit, because as as mean as you think I am to you, I can promise you that I hold everyone to the same standard. I will not be bribed, I will not be bought, and I will try to help you meet that standard as best I can, both through, communicating to you, what the applicable rules are, and trying to help you explore possible solutions. Sometimes there's more than one way to skin a cat. And so I strive to do that each and every day. But when you kick the Christians out of government, you don't get less government, you get worse government. So uh, we need to support Christians in government at all levels, not just the federal government, but we should look to our state representatives and our local representatives, and I'm sorry, there's no such thing as separation of church and state. You're a Christian everywhere you go, or you're not one. You're a Christian at church, but you're also a Christian at home with your family, and you're a Christian on the job site. So that's my soapbox, and I'm sticking to it. Now, the final topic I want to talk about pertains to a system of government that has seems to have become increasingly popular with Gen Z voters, as indicated by the recent election in New York City for the mayor. I was very disappointed in how that election turned out, and I make no apology for saying that. Um, as Christians, we cannot be apolitical. Now, you can disagree with other Christians about tax codes and foreign policy and all that sort of stuff. But again, the legitimate function of government is the promotion of good and the punishment of evil. And that is why we have to talk about communism. Now, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use the term communism. There is a distinction between socialism and communism. I think socialism is a broader term uh, that my dad could explain it better. I think I could be getting this wrong. So, Dad, if you're listening, please forgive me if I'm butchering this. But I believe that socialism is a system of government in which the government owns the means of production. So, AKA, the government owns the factories and the businesses, the corporations. And so you don't really get to choose how you're going to run the company. You run it how the state tells you to run it. In communism, the government pretty much owns everything. Now, as far as I'm concerned, they're basically one and the same because it's the same. It's the same ideology. It's the same mindset. So if you're a socialist, you really want to be a communist. It's only recently come into vogue to call yourself a socialist in this country. It was popular for a while, about 100 years ago, and then that sort of fell out of favor as Democrats became more moderate. And you had some, people like JFK, who, he was anti-communist. But I'm gonna say this bluntly, and so if it offends you, I'm sorry, but it's true. Communism is incompatible with the Christian faith. Period. Point blank. No two ways about it. And I will make my case for that right now. So, a little bit of background about the movement of communism. Of course, it was founded by Karl Marx, who was, I believe, Prussian, which is not really a thing anymore, but Eastern European. And he was a very educated man. Actually, he was baptized into a Lutheran church, so Mark's against us on that one. We sort of his I guess his church didn't do a very good job of catechizing him, so shame. So raised in a Lutheran church. Now he was very well educated. He went to the University of Berlin, and there he began editing radical newspapers and promoting far left ideologies and stirring up dissent. And so, he famously wrote the Communist Manifesto. And in this ideology, he makes the sort of thesis that history is defined by struggles between social classes. So there's like this eternal struggle, not between good and evil, between God and Satan, between righteousness and sin. No. Forget all that. History is really about a struggle between the oppressors and the oppressed. And so wherever there is a discrepancy between someone who has something and someone who does not have that thing, it necessarily means that the person who has it unjustly, and they have it at the expense of the person who does not have it. This is wrong, wrong, wrong. And here's the problem. And evidently what they didn't teach Marx in church. So I seem to remember Jesus saying in the Sermon on the Mount, you cannot serve God and wealth. Meaning, your heart cannot be totally focused and consumed with worldly things, because then it's not focused and consumed with God. And the Marxist ideology is entirely built upon greed and envy. Last I checked, covetousness is one of the big no-nos in the 10 Commandments. Depending on how you count them, it's either the 10th commandment or the 9th and 10th. I tend to think more that it's the 10th. So you have 4 that are oriented toward God, 6 that are oriented toward your neighbors. Some people count it as 3 and 7. It doesn't really matter. The point is, God is very clear. Covetousness is a sin. So, when you look at your neighbor and say, wait, he has this and I don't, I only have this, it must be because he took it by unjust means. And so your concern as someone who buys into this narrative of oppressors and oppressed constantly locked in an eternal struggle, and uh, you have to be trying to make them match. Well, the problem with that is then you have to use the government, which again has a legitimate function. You have to use it illegitimately. Now, I know I said a moment ago that taxes are what they are. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Those are Christ's words. Okay. But this is what happens when you don't have Christians running the government. When you have a Caesar. Now, in our country, we have the opportunity to not have a Caesar. We get to choose who we want to lead us. That is a beautiful, wonderful thing, living in a republic. So, the problem with attempting to solve these discrepancies with government is that it doesn't really answer the core reason for the discrepancy. So, I gave the example a few minutes ago about how, well, I can't play in the NBA. It's not because the NBA is unfairly discriminating against me, and these basketball players that are making $50 million a year are stealing that money from me. It should be mine. I'm making $70,000 a year. That's unfair, and so they should have to give me some of their money. That would be the same way that, like, someone working at McDonald's making $12 an hour looks at me and says, well, "Why is he making that much of a salary when I'm only making this much? He should have to pay me so we can have the same amount of money." The problem with that is it disregards the fact that God has given us certain proclivities, certain abilities, and we have to act upon those, and we can nurture those gifts that God gives us, and we can turn them into productive gains. This is how wealth is created. It's not by like grabbing money from this pile and moving it over into this pile. Wealth is created by people working and providing a good or service that somebody else wants to pay them for. And so the money is just moving hands, but wealth is generated because a new good or service has been created from the productive work of the person who provided it. And so when we work, when we use the talents that God gave us, we are going to generate some kind of value. Obviously, some people generate more value than others. Doctors provide a very valuable service. They save people's lives. Like, if they did not use their knowledge and skills in that very specific time window, in that specific way, someone could die. And because of that, we value their skills very highly. And naturally, rewarding that provides an incentive for someone to want to work hard and become a doctor. You can just walk in off the street and get a job at McDonald's. I don't even know if you have to have a high school diploma. But to be a doctor, you have to work hard. Well, what happens when the government acts as an interlocutor and says, "Okay, doctor, I know that you have worked really hard. I know that you have cultivated all these gifts that God has given you. But we're gonna take all your money and we're gonna give it to this person who's working at McDonald's so you guys can make the same amount of money." Well, that doesn't solve the problem of wealth inequality. It just destroys the incentive for anyone to want to be a good doctor. And so you don't end up with a fairer society, you just end up with no doctors. Or doctors who don't have a clue what they're doing, and then people die and people suffer. And so where it gets really ugly is when a system that is running this way refuses to acknowledge its inadequacy to solve the problem of poverty and wealth discrepancy. It refuses to acknowledge that they are using the wrong tool. And so that tool becomes a hammer and just starts beating everybody down into the ground. You need no better illustration of this than to look at the Soviet Union, particularly how they operated in places like Ukraine, or what they called the Ukraine at that point. I read a fascinating and darkly fascinating book by the historian Anne Applebaum a couple years ago called Red Famine, describing the Soviet Union's just horrendous treatment of people in Ukraine. The enforcement of these collectivized farms where they were just run by people who had no clue how to run a farm. You just take some poor schmo and put him in charge of the farm, so they don't produce wheat at the desired output. Well, so somebody's got to be punished. So you send that guy off to the gulag, and you bring somebody else in. And you let him. He doesn't have a clue, and so you by giving people things that God did not intend them to have, that He did not give them the proclivities to have, you just end up making it miserable for everyone else. And then when it doesn't work out the way that you thought it would, you punish people for not magically making your solution work. And this is how you arrive at tyranny. Communism always, always, always and forever leads to tyranny. And as Christians, we can simultaneously be deferential to even an unjust authority. We can simultaneously do that and call it unjust. In other words, I'm not going to go out and blow up an abortion clinic. That would be wrong. That would be evil. But I'm going to vote for people who will make abortion illegal. I'm going to use my civil power that I have in a representative democracy to ensure that laws are passed that protect the lives of the unborn and that punish the evildoers who want to take their lives. I'm going to vote for people who want to allow people to work and attain the value of their labors. Now, their conscience ought to dictate what they do with that value. And if you're really serving God, then you in a system of free enterprise, you're not going to be solely focused on what can I acquire for myself. You're going to be thinking, what can I acquire for my family? That's my goal. When I go to work every day to get my butt chewed on, I'm going in there because I need to provide for my family. I provide for my family. I acquire extra that we can give to the church every month and to various organizations like Preborn, where ultrasounds are given for free to pregnant women who are considering abortion so that they can see the beautiful life growing inside them. That money wasn't stolen from somebody else. Nobody forced me to give that to Preborn. But my loyalty is first and foremost to God. And I have to do something with that. It doesn't do any good if our faith is just a private matter. We have to do something with it. And so this was kind of the brilliance of Martin Luther, and we'll end with this. Martin Luther realized, after living the monastic lifestyle for so long, where it was sort of believed that only a select few could actually do the work of serving God, where you have no possessions and you go live in a monastery and you pray. It's not about yourself, it's about just orienting yourself toward God. And you work and you are charitable and you keep nothing for yourself, but everybody else out in the world, they're kind of left to their own devices. They can't do any better. They come to church and the priest forgives them and they sort of do their penance, and then they go back out and kind of mess things up again and then come back, and we the priests, we deign to offer forgiveness to them because they don't know any better. Martin Luther said, well, wait a minute. This is not like serving Christ is not like a specialized skill set. This is something that everybody can do. This is something that everybody ought to do if they're serious about what they claim to believe. And so he said, we have to go out into the world. All Christians need to be pursuing a lifestyle that leads you closer to God. And with his writings on the three estates, he made it clear that he believed that that means engaging with the world through the church, through the family, and through the state. AKA, I go to church so that I can be pulled nearer to God. I can draw closer to him. Then I go home and I minister to my family. I teach my son. I help my wife understand concepts that I myself am wrestling with and try to have a godly marriage. And then I go to work and I live out the gospel. I help people. I try to punish evil and reward good in the way that I believe God has given me to do. And so I hope this has been helpful. I'm nearly certain that I'm going to catch some stripes for this one. I'm going to get some thorns put on me for this one. Some nice comfortable thorns just jabbed right into my side. But this is important. It's really important. You can't be a private Christian. You can't be an apolitical Christian. Sorry. We should be against tyranny that enslaves people and punishes them. Here's the thing. Christianity will thrive under persecution. It's happening in China right now. It's happening in Nigeria. Especially the Lutheran Church. I was very encouraged to learn this recently, that the Lutheran Church has a strong presence in Nigeria. God's church will thrive. But just because we can endure persecution doesn't mean that we need to invite it on ourselves. Satan will take care of that for us. There's plenty of persecution to go around. Our call as Christians is to be bold, and wherever that is. So we need to just let Christ occupy our families and our churches and our governments. And so no more of this limp-wristed Christianity. Okay? Being a Christian means something. It means you follow Christ. It means you take your stripes, even when you don't deserve them. And you love people. And you say, hey, I know that you just chewed on my butt for an hour, but I love you and I forgive you. That's what being a Christian is. It is no less than what Christ did for us at Calvary. He literally took the penalty of all of our mistakes, all of our wrongdoings on himself. And as Christians, when we are told to pick up our cross daily and follow Christ, that is not an empty saying. That's a call to action. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for watching. I'm Luke, not the saint, just a sinner. And this is Luke Up. God bless.